Welcome back. This is my first recording session of the new year. It is currently January 8th, though I know this video will come out a little bit later. I took some time off with my family, and we're going to get back into trees. So this is where we finished off last time, with some kind of more normal looking trees, but branching out a little bit from the pretty simple stuff we started with, which was basically just focusing on basic shapes. So if you haven't seen those two videos, I would highly recommend that you go watch them first. I will link them in the description below. This is trees part 1 here, and trees part 2 is right here. Today, we're going to start very creatively on trees part 3. And today we're just going to be working on kind of stretching things out a little bit more. We're going to be trying, I kind of want to call this fantasy trees, but I actually think that'll be the next tree video, because I'll probably want to make another one. So this one will be more of just some bizarre, fun trees that you might include. We're not quite into Dr. Seuss territory, but we're getting something that's a little bit closer to that. So let's go ahead and start with something like this. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this over a little bit better. So I'm going to start with my line for my trunk. I just find that helps. And instead of doing a giant basic shape or a sphere, we're actually going to see what happens if we do something like this. We're going to start by just creating these as circles. These will be tufts of, it's a hard word to say, tufts of leaves. And we're going to see what happens when we try to turn that into a functional tree. That'll be kind of our first one. Our second one over here, we're going to see what happens if we start with a tree that has a bizarre trunk. So we're going to work with an S curve kind of like this. Obviously, this will widen out as it gets closer to the ground. So we'll try something like that. I'm not going to focus too much on roots. I think I'll do roots in a future video. But if there's anything else like that that you would like me to focus on, things that you feel like maybe I'm missing, or just as you're working on your trees or similar things like clouds, you're like, man, I would really like to know that now rather than later. And I think the last one we're going to do is going to be another that's more of a standard tree. Actually, I'm going to break the trunk up here just because it'll be fun to have something different. And then we're going to do leaf segments like this. Now, some of these kind of trees actually exist, though often we're just making a more exaggerated form of them because, frankly, that's just more fun. I've had some questions recently about what kind of pens I use. This is the one I use for pretty much all these videos unless I say otherwise. This is a Pigma Micron 01, which is 0.25 millimeters. This is their very basic one. Like, this is the one that you can buy in packs of 5 or 10 of them for, $12, $8. You can get a bunch of different sizes, but I use this standard one because this is, from my knowledge, the most common. And so if you are doing something similar to what I'm doing, I want you to be able to do the same thing. I want you to be able to very easily commit to doing the same manner of drawing as me. I don't want to use any, cheating or other tools that you might not have. There is a time and a place for that. That kind of stuff can be really fun, but it's not particularly helpful if that's what my goal is. So let's start at the top here. And we're going to begin very much like we have with the other trees. We're going to start with these shapes and just molding them out. And again, I am not making my lines perfect because, trees aren't perfect. The leaf structures are kind of different, so I'm using wobbly lines as I go here. Me trying hard to keep the drawing in focus, but can't always do that. And I'm trying to think about what I'm doing and how I'm going to problem solve things as they pop up in this tree. I haven't drawn one of these before. Like I've said on the other videos, I often do practice to make sure I'm ready. But sometimes I just get excited and jump into things. And sometimes that works out well, sometimes it doesn't. But I don't think it's a bad thing for any of you who are watching something like this who are probably struggling with several different topics of drawing, just like all of us are. It's not a bad thing to see an artist, make a mistake. I would say fail. I don't know that when you're trying to learn how to practice something and it doesn't go right, that's really a failure. There are times where it is, your express purpose of something doesn't go well. But for this, the failure would be not learning something. My goal in teaching this is twofold: to help others and also to learn things myself, because I find that you often learn the most about a topic when you sit down and try to think about all of the constituent pieces and how you're going to get that across to someone else. So I'm going to come back up to the top here. I'm thinking about this not quite as willow, but that the leaves are fairly heavy and so they're falling down. I am going to, as I go through, give some indications of the leaf forms, these kind of arrow-shaped triangular forms. But the fun part here on this one is I'm really thinking about, this is odd. This is a funny kind of tree where you've got these tufts that are kind of branching out from the way the tree is built. Obviously, the trunk is going to be pretty thin up at top. I'm going to give myself just a couple little branches. Again, remember from prior videos and prior knowledge that trunks are always thinnest at the top and are thicker at the bottom, that your branches will go not like this, but will go more like this. They're offset and they're spiraling around the tree. Thinking about those kind of things while you're drawing can often help you to escape mistakes and make things that look a little bit more realistic. Some of that does become autopilot the longer you work, which I think is really where most of us want to be, but try not to be frustrated with yourself. It will take a lot of time. So I am slowly just going to bounce around, but primarily I'm going to be working from top to bottom. I am going to be thinking about my light source coming this angle. You can't see the arrow up there, but I'm going to be thinking the light source is from the upper right. That just helps me determine where my shadows are going to be. Generally, when I draw trees, I will make my shadows from, I will make my light source coming directly from above, but on this one, I'm going to vary it a little bit, mostly so I don't get bored, and maybe it'll be of benefit to you. Remember when you are doing the texture for your leaves that these should not be, or don't have to be, just boring little hatch marks. They can actually be directional. You can make little notches that seem to imply leaves. There's a lot that you can do. Keep in mind too that these tufts will overlap themselves, and so you will end up with some areas of darkness. The bottom part of this top tuft, for example, is obviously going to be overshadowed by the stuff beneath it, or stuff above it, sorry. If my voice sounds a little strange, I apologize. I think there's a good chance that I'm getting sick. My wife is sick right now, and I am of the mindset where, well, my voice is still functioning at this moment, so I'm going to get some video recording done, and that way, if everything craps out tomorrow, I will still have some stuff to edit and some stuff to offer. So I tend to work pretty far ahead, but not always. Not always. But that's kind of coming together. I like how that looks. It looks almost like a tree on top of a tree, which I find rather comical. So let's come down to this next tuft and start playing with that a little bit. I know that my dialogue is not quite as clean when I'm recording this way. I'm recording this live while I'm making the drawing, but I have gotten some pretty good feedback from all of you watching recently, and it seems like this is, if not preferable, is not agitating to most of you. And I'm glad to know that, because it is a much more streamlined way for me to make content. Obviously, once I've recorded this, the audio is intact, and assuming I didn't botch things or set up my microphone wrong, I'm usually in a better position. It takes a little bit less time editing, and I'm not a super huge fan of the editing process. But you don't get my beautifully written scripts. You get more of an authentic me. And for some of you, that's probably a benefit. For some of you, that's probably a deficit. I am hoping that me doing it in real time, not speeding anything up, you getting to hear my train of thought as I'm working will be more beneficial than the deficits. But as always, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. And yeah, I'm making this to hopefully be beneficial to all of you, with the added teeny bit of selfishness that when I am forced to practice things and think about things, I tend to get better too. But if we're being realistic, most altruism when accompanied by a teeny bit of selfishness, is probably going to be better in the long run, more sustainable. So I'm not as happy with this tuft, but I'm going to call it good. I'm going to shade the underside of these branches. You can see right there, that's a really dark shadow, and I'm happy with that. I'm comfortable with that. This one, I'm going to start by bringing the branches over as if this tuft is more in front, and I like that idea. So we're actually going to have the top of the branch here and then branch up a little bit. So this one's a little bit, I don't know what the word would be, maybe a little bit more interesting or unique. Let's get some lines to show the side of our tree trunk. All right. If you hear any weird noises in the background, there's a good chance it's snow melting. We got some snow that we were not anticipating a couple days ago, and it's so cold here that it's not melting very quickly, but the sun is bright today, so it is just now starting to melt. I'm putting this in real quick. This is a tuft that is on the far side of the tree. I don't know that I like how that looks, but again, you figure these things out by making them. I am darkening it mostly just because I want it to be understood that it's not part of the foreground. Maybe that was a mistake, maybe not. If you're making trees along with me, you can decide if you want to include stuff like that or not. That's the big thing about drawing in public, though this isn't, obviously entirely in public, and at the same time it's very public because people all around the world can watch it. But what I mean by that is that you can see choices I've made, and you as an artist can dissect whether that's what you want to make as well. There's a lot of benefit that comes from watching other people make art. Generally, when I'm trying to learn something or brush up on a skill, I will go find a video nowadays. And I don't always listen to what the person is saying as much as I want to see how they're making decisions. I try to find the break points. I look for, when does it go from looking like a sketch or from scattered details to looking like a thing? And that point, I find, is very important. So I try to make sure that in all my drawings, I include those points as best as I can find them and articulate them. So that's fun. I can imagine a tree like this being pretty big, where you've almost got colonies of birds that are living in each of the tufts, and that seems to me like that would be really cute too. I find that anytime you can increase the storytelling element of what you're doing, it's going to make the drawing more interesting for any viewer. It's also going to make it easier for you to keep working on it. And that's important. Anything you can do to increase your own buy-in for your drawings is going to be of benefit to you. Drawing's hard, and often you won't nail every single drawing that you want to make. And so if you can find the little things that make you chuckle or laugh or smile, they will keep you in the process longer. And I think that's a win. So if you want to put a little treehouse up in here or some cute little birds, if you want to hide a mouse, I know a local artist here in Colorado who does beautiful, goofy drawings, and he includes a mouse in every single one of his pieces. And when he does prints, I think he actually will go through and add the mouse in different locations. But those kind of things are fun, and if they are just, making the process 3% more enjoyable for you, I would encourage you to do that all the way. All right, I'm getting too focused on a singular tuft. I've got to try to get myself to focus a little bit more on the overarching image of the tree. And that's another thing too, is especially with stuff like this, where there is so much implied texture. Like, I'm obviously not going to draw every leaf, but there are a lot of shortcuts where you can figure out how to imply things. So these shadows, for example, imply that something is overlapping. This dark one implies that it's overlapping, but then this bottom chunk comes out a little bit further. I don't need to put in an immense amount of effort to make that look perfect. I just need to get it to the point where it implies what I'm trying to imply. So this tuft, perhaps being a little bit further back on the tree, I am not going to spend a ton of time on, and I'm going to take the branches off this one. This is obviously a tuft that's coming right for us. So this branch is simultaneously coming right for us. I'm going to shade it this way with some cross contour shading. That will help a little bit. Again, looks like its own little tree. This one, I'm going to have the branch come down like this. I'm actually going to have another branch kind of branching off this way, almost to imply that there might have been a tuft there at some point, but it has since died. Okay, so we'll do something like this. We'll widen that branch out a teeny bit. Oop, that was wider than expected, but... You know, recording these, I have moments of feeling a little bit like I ought to talk like Bob Ross, where it's like, oh, that's just a happy little accident. I would feel very disingenuous, whichever it is, if that's how I acted. I tend to have a little bit darker sense of humor as my coping mechanism, but I certainly appreciate the man. I made fun of him a lot when I was in high school. I had a friend and a roommate in college who used to give my artist buddies and I a hard time. He's like, you study all these people like Monet and Van Gogh, but yet Bob Ross is probably, you know, more well-known than any of them. And that was infuriating for a little younger me. And I'm not sure why. There was something about the TV personality artist that felt like he couldn't be as good as the great masters. And then, yet, you know, giving him a chance, you know, maybe only 5 or 7 years back, I kind of came to the realization, like, he's just a genuine good dude. Like, he reminded me a lot of Mr. Rogers. And, you know, honestly, I think that's pretty high praise. Just a good person who makes the world a better place. And I think he has been inspiring for a lot of artists. I know a lot of people in my life who are older, you know, getting into art in retirement. And it seems like a lot of Bob Ross's stuff makes art very accessible. It makes it feel like it's something that could be done by anyone. And that's a beautiful thing. That's just another example of me being a doofusy kid who thought I knew more than I did. And, you know, as artists and humans, the more we can work against those things in ourselves, the better. This guy's taken a while. I'm starting to second guess whether I can do all 3 trees in this. So maybe I won't, but I hate lining things out at the beginning and then not actually following through. These things take more time than expected. And that's partly because we're slowly upping the ante and making the trees a little bit more complicated. Each of these tufts is just as much shading as some of the first trees that we did on the first lesson, but we will see. Maybe this will just be a longer video. It's always the temptation to make it into multiple videos, but we shall see. I'm going to take a chunk of the middle of this tuft and make it dark just to add some variance. Sometimes I'll start doing that hatching and then be like, I'm just gonna scribble. I'm varying my marks here. I've got some hatching marks for shading, and then I'm doing little squigglies like this. I'll do bigger versions of it to imply leaves. The variance in marks, as long as it doesn't become overcrowded and look too random, is going to benefit you because there are a lot of random overlapping shapes that are going to occur when you're drawing things like this. This tuft is getting lower to the ground. I wonder if this one's maybe been eaten, you know, picked at by some critters, and that would make it look a little bit different too. More haggard. Not Hagrid, but Hagrid's good too. All right, let's go ahead and think about how the branch would work here. We're gonna have it kind of sloopy. Have that. Feel as if this branch needs to be a little bit thicker because we're down at the bottom. Nice part about trees is when you make a branch thicker like that, it ends up just looking better, more gnarled. I've not done a good job of this on this session, but because the tufts aren't totally solid, you should be able to see the branches through them in certain places. So we can go ahead and go back through and add some of those lines and whatnot. Not a big deal. I am trying to speed up a little bit to finish this one off. But you, as you are drawing, if you're making your own trees, you have no obligation to speed up. You work at your own pace, you finish what you want to. And if you need to pause this and go get another cup of tea or something and come back and keep working on it, that's totally fine. Do not feel like you need to work at my pace, whether that's faster or slower. It's come to my knowledge recently that some people think I draw fairly fast. I do not, but that's probably just because your normal is just what you think your normal is. I assume that I draw pretty slowly, probably because it feels slow to my brain, who's trying to solve all the problems in the universe while I'm drawing. Not a good idea. Try to keep your mind more blank. Sometimes art can be meditative, and that can be a really good thing if you let your mind wander in productive ways, but I find mine doesn't always do that. Had to get some tea. My throat is starting to tell me it's not particularly happy with me. I suppose if I couldn't get through all the 3 trees in a single session, I could always come back later and record part of the others. But then I'd probably end up putting it in just a single video anyway. Alright, we need to get this tree finished off, guys. Okay, let's get these branches up in here. That's kind of a fun way to do that there. Kind of like this one, though. It's very different than some of the other tufts. And the more you do these kinds of drawings, the more you learn. And I think a lot of that comes from experimenting. If you don't draw trees, maybe you're like me and you draw a lot of robots and dragons and such. Drawing something that is outside your wheelhouse can be really good. Things always have a way of finding their way in. Intermingling. The world is made up of, an infinite amount of beautiful, cool things, and yet at the same time, a finite amount of shapes, lighting situations, and colors. And so the more you draw, the better you get at drawing. And even if you're drawing things that are totally disparate from the things that you want to draw all the time. Obviously, like if you want to draw robots, like practice drawing robots. But if you draw flowers in some strange way, it's going to help you draw your robots better. All right, I'm heading down to the bottom here. Going to get my basic lines for my trunk. I'm doing this hastily. There's no reason for you to follow suit. You could easily take some more time. I'm going to darken in the side here because that's kind of where our light source is not coming. Random couple dots. I found recently that like adding some dots to things just almost implies a little bit of additional texture. I'm going to do some grass like I've been doing in the prior ones. I just think that adding in some stuff at the bottom gives some sense of scale and where this tree is. If I really quickly like put in like another tree here, even though we definitely can't tell if it's a sapling or what, it makes our tree look really big, which is great because big trees are awesome. All right, well, we're moving at awesome breakneck paces. Let's jump over to tree number 2. This one is going to be just kind of this squirrely trunk here. So let's start by thinking about where our branches are going to come. This one's going to kind of come here. Going to be like this and then branch off. Maybe another one there. This one is going to be like this. Maybe another underneath. This one. Checking to make sure you can see that all right. These tufts are going to be in front, so I think we'll do, this one is going to be the most forefront. We do this big one on top as well. It's going to be one back behind. And then this one's going to be a little bit back behind as well. It's going to be in front of the trunk. This one's going to be in front of the trunk. Means I'll do another right back here that's back behind the trunk. So I'll take the trunk around like this. I would do some really crazy roots, but I think roots are going to have to be their own video. So obviously I'm planning this one just a little bit differently than I planned some of the others. And that's mostly just because I get bored if I do the same thing every single time. So, we get kind of the bottom of this tuft like that. Probably another little bit back there that's further in the background. And we're going to have this little bit coming out there. All right, well, let's see how this goes. I'm going to do a lot less shading on this one. We'll do light come in from right above. We'll start on the top tuft. And I'm really just going to let these leaves look pretty light. Obviously going to continue to have more texture around the edges of the tree just because that's how it would be. Some bigger leaf formations. Some shading behind where this is overlapping or is not totally filled in. You can see into kind of the heart of the tree. I'm going to keep coming down, though these are going to start stretching over into the next tree. Hopefully you can see that all right. It's funny because this kind of drawing, to me at least, doesn't look like much of anything for quite a while. Like, it just looks like this weird amalgamation of shapes. And I've talked about this in the past in other videos, but I mean, man, I've got so many videos now, it's hard to keep track of everything. So it does bear repeating. Most drawings will go through an ugly stage. And it can be a really difficult thing for new artists, or even for some artists who've been at it for a long time, to recognize that your drawing doesn't suck. It's not going to be, a lost cause or a bad drawing just because it has a phase where it looks ugly or gross. A lot of drawings will have periods where they just don't look good. This is far worse in painting, I think, because of the way paintings are often built up, where you work the whole thing simultaneously. Drawings often, you can tell here I'm working primarily this one segment right now. So this one segment will start to look good, presumably, before the whole drawing looks good. And that is not the case with paintings. But give yourself some grace if you find that your drawing is going through kind of an ugly teenage period. And sorry if you're a teenager, but that's kind of how we talk about those kind of things. And often how biologists talk about, swans, where they're not as cute or regal or beautiful in a traditional sense in their early years, and then they become, what they're supposed to be as they grow older. Your drawing may have a similar period. It may have a time where it's a tadpole, where it's not really a good frog, and it's not really perfectly adjusted for living in the water. It's got, starting to grow legs and stuff. Your drawings might encounter similar phases, and that's fine. They have to, often. Sometimes it's not the case, but I find very frequently with my own work that my drawings will go through these periods where for a couple minutes, a couple hours, I'm just sitting there going, oh my goodness, did I make a mistake? This is gross. And they don't always recover. There are certain pieces, I've done a couple drawings in the past week that I don't like. And that's not uncommon. My biggest piece of advice there is, if you complete a piece of art that you don't like, is make something else. Because it's very easy to fall into the temptation of, I am going to not make art for a while because this thing agitated me. And I think that is obviously an instinctive response to protect yourself, but it will also keep you from, it'll keep you from progressing. It is a lie. It is a lie that you tell yourself to avoid the pain of having a piece that doesn't look the way you want. And if you give in to that, then the next time you come back to make art, it's going to be all the harder to progress. And that pain is, I think the pain of enduring is far less than the pain of coming back later and realizing, oh my goodness, I've lost progress. That is maybe one of my least favorite things, one of the most detrimental things for an artist, is to realize that you have lost skill, that you are not as good as you once were. And all the worse if it's because you gave up. You had a couple paintings or drawings that didn't work out the way you wanted to, and so you gave up. You threw in the towel and went, oh, I just can't do this. I've been practicing for a year and my art still doesn't look good. It's like, well, it's fine, but a lot of professional artists talk about how, like, it's a 10-year cycle. You know, practicing for a year is not necessarily going to make you good. It'll make you better, hopefully, if you've been practicing well, but it won't necessarily make you good. Art is hard. It takes a long time to get proficient in even a mild degree. I'm going to shade this whole portion as if this is just a massive overhang. You'll see me scribbling, and then I will go to hatching to have the darkness change, and then at the end here I will start actually making some more leaf marks and some more shading along the edge, as if there are parts that are catching the light that are lighter, and as if there are parts that are directly in shadow to make them kind of darker along that edge. I have been wondering recently why I chose to start like my how to draw series with ink instead of pencil. I'm not 100% sure why, other than just I like ink a lot. I am planning, tentatively to start doing the same thing with pencil. Curious about all of your thoughts, if you would be interested in that, but also if there are just any curiosity or thoughts about what you think about that process. I don't really know what I'm getting at, but maybe it would just be interesting to hear from all of you if there's any yeah, I was also wondering why you did that, or I kind of think it's a good idea because of this. This was one of those situations that was more of an instinct decision and less of a I'm making this super purposefully. So if I want to make this chunk look like it's in front of that other chunk, I'm going to have to create some shading up against the two that really gives me this kind of defined edge. If I darken in both as if there's shading here and it's casting a shadow there, it won't be distinguishable. So when I shade in this one, I'm not going to shade exactly on it. Think of it this way, like if you've got a ball here and then you've got another ball here, if you just shade this and then shade this, they'll just blend into each other. So often what works better is if you leave yourself this thin crest, and then you can shade in this thin crest of highlight, Then you can shade in this figure, and then you can shade in this figure, and you end up with this little rim highlight that really helps differentiate the fact that these two are separate objects. And this will actually happen in real life. You're exaggerating it a little bit for the drawing, but that's fine. That's what a drawing is. But that will happen because that just thin edge will often catch light. All right, let's come back to this tree. This tree that is taking an inordinate amount of time. I am starting to think we are not going to get to tree 3 on this one, so sorry about that. The video just will end up being, an hour long if I do. And so I think if I do that one on the next one, I'll do that and one other kind of bizarre tree, and then probably after that we'll go to roots. I'm sure I'm forgetting things too. I'm sure there are other things that need to be covered, and I will get to them in time. But I am learning and uncovering things as I go too. All right, what's going to happen here? Because this trunk has to kind of curl around in there. I think maybe we're going to take this dark chunk up here and continue to kind of have it perpetuate itself. It'll look nice, I think, to have this really big dark segment. This is the time where if you have a bigger pen, it would be better. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm just going to keep using this one because this is kind of their most accessible pen, and I want it to be realistic for y'all on what this would feel like. I am coming up against this branch, which is also shadowed, so I am darkening the background a lot more intensely right around it so that hopefully there's still a little bit of a distinguishment between those two forms. Oh no, I evidently just pushed too hard on this pen and bent the tip of it. So I might have to get a new one of these in just a moment. That happened from the scribbles, so maybe we've learned something there, that if you're going to scribble, don't push too hard. Strange. Yeah, bent it a little bit. Oh well. Things happen. We'll go back to making our marks a little bit more kind on the pen. Like I said, you know, you're always learning, always figuring things out. And maybe that wasn't related to what I was doing. It just seems coincidental. Along with the question of like what kind of pens I use too, I have not yet had one of these pens run out of ink. I mean, obviously they have to. They can't have infinite ink. That wouldn't make sense. But I have not had one ever run out. So if you have, I'd love to hear about it because I've been using some of these guys for years. What usually happens is long before I would abandon it because I ran out of ink is the tip becomes too small. I don't know exactly why. I think that they just kind of seem to wear out over time though. And so this one is newer and has a longer tip, which is easier to draw. When they get really small at the end of their life cycle, it's easy to accidentally, you know, if you slant too much, you'll get the metal tip touching your drawing, your paper, and that is not a great thing. All right, so we've got this kind of bit. I am going to actually just go over this with some light hatching to pull that back into the background like I talked about earlier. So this is really starting to come together. This feels like a kind of semi-believable, interesting tree. Let's go back down here. We'll start bringing this form in. I am certainly feeling the pressure to get this finished now because it's going on so long. But again, there's no need for that for me other than my preconceived notion of how long this video is going to be, and is 0 for you. So if you need to, take a break or finish it up or work on it for a long time. And I would love to see your drawings. We've got a Discord server attached to this channel. It's linked in pretty much every one of my videos. It's free. There's nothing attached to it that costs money. There's no way for me to get money out of it. So it's just a community that we built to try to give online artists a little bit of community, a little bit of an environment where you can share your artwork, hopefully get feedback on it that is kind and constructive. And yeah, it's been a lovely environment. I get to share the stuff I work on and get feedback sometimes and encouragement other times, and I get to see what other people are working on. It's also really, really good because, you know, the YouTube comments are a certain form of communication, but they're haphazard. People are generally confident in saying things that are unkind there, though I get very few of those, but I do see it. And yeah, the Discord server just has a lot of potential for building relationships in a constructive way for the artist, and artists need feedback on their work in order to get better. I've got people in my life that I seek when I need to improve something, and it's a good thing. I mean, it's nice having the internet to be able to... I'm working on the trunk here, by the way. I'm going to leave the top parts of it, even though they would be quite in shadow. I'm going to leave them a little bit lighter just because the contrast will be nice. If I was going to be entirely accurate, they would be darker, and I probably will darken in some of this, but the contrast is needed. So that's just a lot of lines there. I'm going to darken in this bottom part because it's obviously in shadow. Yeah, that looks much better. This one too, to separate it from the trunk down below it. It is going to be faster. You could obviously do all these drawings in pencil if you wanted to. It is going to be a faster prospect. These kind of marks are not going to be faster in pencil, but all of the shading is much, much, much quicker. There's something, though, that is so satisfying about making a successful drawing with ink, because you've got every possibility in the world of everything going wrong. It's hard to fix things. I do keep white acrylic and white gel pens handy just in case I need to fix things, but even though I have that as an option, my brain hasn't quite figured it out yet, and I still have the same mild level of anxiety working on ink drawings as I always have. I don't think that kind of anxiety is necessarily a bad thing. It's the pressure to do well. Just like you have probably mild anxiety when you drive, because the reality is you are piloting a giant chunk of metal at speeds that are dangerous. It is good to have a little bit of stress about it. Bad if it inhibits you, if it inhibits your decision making. But the reality is drawing is not, should not be as stressful as driving. The worst case scenario is not someone getting hurt. The worst case scenario is a drawing turning out poorly. And whilst that is tragic in its own ways, it is certainly not the same. Not the same caliber at all. For this tuft that is back behind the tree, I am simply going to shade it in. This is something you can do with pieces that are in the background. It just implies that it's there, it's shaded. We can't make out the details, presumably, because it's further back, it's smaller. I'm going to start on this last tuft. I'm going to do kind of a crest there. I did this one weird. I'm not sure what my original intent was when I put the lines down, so I'm going to kind of play with this a little bit and try to figure out what I'm trying to do. Add in some more leafy bits, almost like this one is, not quite figured out what it wants to be either. Hey, buddy, you're like me. You don't know what you're doing. All right, so I'm just making a lot more of these little leaf marks. You can have a couple little shadow sections. And then we're going to try shading in the branch here and hope that that kind of brings things together. Should work out all right. Yeah, that looks a little strange, but should be fine. Again, your brain is not going to look at all the tiny little details on a drawing like this. It's going to be inferring things, making sure that it looks right. I'm going to do some shadow here underneath where the branch is, like the branch is casting a shadow on the tree. I'm going to do the same thing here. Just makes it feel a little bit more like all of the shapes are interacting with one another in the same way that this shape is overlapping this one. So I'm going to come in and add in some shadows that I didn't think about earlier. Use directional hatching to imply the direction that the whole object is leaning. And that should help. I'll do the same thing down in here. I bounce back and forth a lot on these drawings, and that is mostly just because as I'm working on something, I look back and I noticed, mistakes or things that I don't like or things that can be fixed. So now I'm just going to try to finish off this trunk. I'm using lots of lines that are moving in the same direction as the tree. I do need to spend some time probably teaching a little bit more on bark, because there's a lot of different kinds of bark on trees. This is my standard way of doing it, where I mostly just keep lines that are parallel to the movement of the tree. I get them more focused on the edges because the edges are stacking up, you know, as a cylinder. If you are reading something on like a soda can, which is a cylinder, the words as you rotate it away from you will get more compressed. It's the same thing that's happening here. And so I think this will be good enough. I could keep going, add in some tiny little lines here. Could easily create like a crack in the trunk. We'll do that right here. And then have it open up slowly. So we're gonna hatch it open. That makes it a little bit more interesting, gives it a little bit more character. All right, well that is 2 trees that are a combination of all the prior skills, a little bit more complicated. We're not gonna get in our more Seussian tree this time, so I guess we'll do that next. But as always, thanks for being here, thanks for watching. I hope that this has been beneficial. I would love to hear what you're working on, and if you would like to check out the Discord server in the description below and show me what your trees look like, that would be awesome. Thank you to my patrons who are on the screen right now. If you want to check out the Patreon, it's linked below as well. You get access to some behind the scenes thing. I'm going to have some videos here that are dealing with the remaking of my studio, which sounds really complicated, but really I just cleaned it out and changed things. You get the ability to vote on what's coming up and give me suggestions and things like that, but it mostly just gives you an ability to help me with what I do here. So if you want to check that out, feel free, but no pressure. Well, have a good one, y'all. See you soon.